One very important concept in music that complements the idea of pitch is the idea of rhythms. When we play something, we want to have an idea of what the feel of the rhythm should be, how fast or slowly we're changing between the different notes, or how we're articulating our different notes in order to get the sound that we want to accomplish. So the primary ideas behind rhythm is really that we're going to divide up our music into bars, or sometimes referred to as measures, depending on who you talk to or what books you're looking at. And we're going to have this driving pulse in our song that's called a beat. And the beat is going to be consistent, and it's going to be told to us through the tempo. The tempo tells us how many beats there are in a minute, which in turn tells us how fast or slow the music is moving based on how many beats we expect to see in each minute. So the general idea is going to be that as long as we have the idea of tempo and a beat in our heads, we'll be able to play different rhythms with those beats. And one of the things that's going to help us do that is the idea of time signatures. A time signature tells us how many beats are in a bar, as well as what note gets the beat. So the top number represents how many beats are in a bar, so the first number here is going to represent the top number, which is the number of beats in the bar. And then the bottom number is going to represent which note is getting the beat. So for instance, 4/4 time is a very common time signature. Now when I discuss which note gets the beat, we will have to discuss the different types of notes that exist. So in general, I'm going to discuss these main 5 types of notes, and there are more notes than just these ones and more different ways that we can work with them, but we're going to mostly focus on the fundamentals of these 5 notes. When we discuss 4/4 time, 4/4 time tells us that this here, the quarter note, gets the beat, which is written in this way. So this gives you a picture of what they all look like, and then below we have the names of them. Now the idea is no matter what time signature we're in, we can always say that if, for instance, the quarter note is the beat, the 8th note is going to get half as much time. So this would be half of a beat in 4/4. Similarly, the 16th note will get half of the 8th note, which means that this would be a quarter of a beat in 4/4 time. Going in the opposite direction, the half note gets twice as much of a beat as the quarter note, which means that this is worth 2 beats instead of just 1. And then a whole note gets twice as much as the half note, which means that it gets 4 beats per bar. So that would be the idea of each of these different types of notes. So our quarter note is going to get a single beat in 4/4 time, and then everything else is sort of measured respective to that. And that's the idea. Even if we have a different note getting the beat, we'll have a similar relationship as this, where everything sort of moves, either as smaller by halves or larger by doubling it. So that'd be the general way that we can relate these notes together. So when we discuss quarter note time, we're really discussing time signatures where a quarter note is getting a beat, right? So as we discussed before, 4/4 has 4 beats per bar. There are other types of time signatures like 3/4 time where we have 3 beats per bar, and the time signature is denoting that the quarter note gets the beat. So you can see here that we have different measures of 4/4 time, and we're showing how these different things fit into the bar. So, for instance, a quarter note is worth 1 beat. You can see that these half notes are both worth half of a beat. So you'll see that we often stem them together. It's called stemming them together, where we draw this line between them. This helps us to connect together beats to make it easier to see where the beat actually lies. So you can see we've connected these two together, so these whole thing represents 1 beat as well. These 16th notes, since they're worth a quarter of a beat each, we stem 4 of them together, and this whole section is worth 1 beat. And then this quarter note here is worth a beat as well. So you can see we get a total of 4 beats for the bar, and that would be the way that we can set up our rhythms. So a few other things that we should discuss. This line here indicates where one bar ends and the other begins. So you can see that this bar ends here and then this one begins, because this one has 4 beats already, and then this one has 1, 2, and then these are stemmed together it's 3 for the first part and then 4 for the second part. So you can see that we stumped it together to represent 2 beats instead of 1. Oftentimes we'll group eighth notes in groups of 4 or groups of 2 when we're working in 4/4 time, depending on how many there are. We won't typically group them in groups of 3 because that makes a bit of an awkward where we group together like 1.5 beats together. If we can group together whole numbers of beats, we'll typically tend to do that. And with 16th notes, we do the same sort of thing. However, usually we tend to limit it mostly to 4 when we work in 4/4 time, just because 4 is seemingly the common number here, so that's what we typically stick with. Now, when we discuss the idea of music, we also have the absence of noise, which are known as rests. They're sections where the musician isn't playing anything at all. So similar to our previous slide where we talked about the different types of notes, each of these rests follow suit. So if we discuss 4/4 time, for instance, the quarter note gets a beat, the eighth is going to get half of that, the 16th will get half of the eighth, and then the whole rest gets double of the quarter, and then the whole rest gets double of the half rest, right? So we still have the same sort of relationship, just different symbols that represent rests instead of representing notes. When we have this, rather than playing a note for a beat, we just stop playing for a beat. So that's the general idea of this. And utilizing rests, we can complete or put together more complicated rhythms. Oftentimes we'll use rests to sort of be able to do, well, really a variety of things. It could be used to create like a more interesting rhythm. Maybe we don't want an instrument to be playing for one section while a soloist plays or a few other instruments play instead. So we might give them rests for those sections and similar to that. So that's the general idea of what we're doing when we have rests. Now to end off here, we'll just discuss a bit about counting beats in music. So I want to give you a bit of an idea of how we count 4/4 time. When we count things like quarter notes, it's pretty easy. We'll have a beat going and then we can just say, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and continue counting like that. Let me actually play you what it sounds like when we play on the beat. So what I'm going to do is with the bass note on the piano, I'm going to play the beat, which will be steady, and then we'll play the rhythm with some other note. I'll just do like an octave higher. So we'll do like a higher note from that. So let's see what that sounds like. So you can see when we play on the beat, it's kind of boring, nice and simple really, but it becomes a bit more interesting when we introduce things like eighth notes. With eighth notes, we tend to count using and. So rather than doing 1, 2, 3, 4, we'll say 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So that's the general idea. So I'll once again play a steady rhythm with my left hand in the bass, and I'll give you the rhythm of an eighth note instead. So you can see now, instead of having just one note every beat, we have 2 notes every single beat. So every single time we have that one pulse, there's 2 notes. And then similarly with 16th notes, on every beat, we're going to see 4 notes. So this we typically count using a bit of a different idea. We do 1E and 2E and 3E and 4E and so that's how we're able to count 4 beats instead of 2 or 1 beat. So that's typically the way that we would count 16th notes. So you can see in each of these measures, I've sort of written out how they would look. So that last measure, we're counting 1, 2, and 3 and 4. So that's sort of the way that that rhythm would end up sounding. So once again, let me try playing some 16th notes with a steady beat to show you what that ends up sounding like. That would be the general idea, is that we're going to play 4 notes every single beat. My beat was a little bit not so steady, but that's sort of the general idea of it. So with these different counting techniques, you'll be able to count more rhythmically, right? When you do like 3E and you almost follow the rhythm of what you're supposed to be playing fairly intuitively just by counting like that. And as we start to introduce more complicated rhythms, we'll find more counting techniques that work really well to make you sort of think rhythmically rather than, trying to actually, work it out in your head just by knowing. A lot of the time, though, listening to the music, how it's supposed to sound, helps a lot as well. But if we're able to sort of like clap out or play these rhythms, it helps a lot to be able to do things like sight read music, for instance. So this gives you a general idea of the fundamentals of rhythm in time signatures. Of course, there's a lot of more complex time signatures and more complex rhythms and notes that you can play, but I'm just sticking with the basics here so that we have a solid foundation so that when we move on to the more complex stuff, it's a lot easier to be able to build on top of these ideas that we've discussed now.